Everybody, thank you so much for joining our bond discussion this evening. Biggest bond in history. We have a member of our DISD School Board, Lance Currie, here to talk about the presentation. I first want to mention for everybody watching at home on the live stream and everybody here, we have two precinct chairs with us. We have Melanie Smith and Wendi Mueller. And if you are interested in using them as a resource for some information about upcoming elections or just anything happening locally, please comment your email under the live stream and I will give it to them so that you can be on their email lists. Great, so I am Allison Mitchell. I'm very happy to be hosting this. I'm going to hand the mic over to Lance to start the presentation and I hope you guys enjoy following along. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Allison, for that. So thank you so much for letting me come. Again, my name is Lance Currie. I am the Dallas ISD School Board trustee for this area. And so what do we talk about this area? My schools are W.T. White High School, where I have just about every school in that feeder pattern. And then I also have Thomas Jefferson High School and some of the schools that feed in it as well. So basically north of Northwest Highway and west of the tollway is the primary bulk of where I represent. And before I get started, I think I've met most of the people who are in the room here, but let me just tell you just a little bit about who I am so that you know who's talking. So again, I'm Lance Currie. I was elected in May 2024. I'm not up for election again until November 2027, so I will not be on the ballot, but what will be on the ballot is the DISD bond, which I'm here to talk about. I love public schools. My mother was a public school teacher and a principal in Arlington. As a single mom, my daycare after school was always hanging out in the hallways waiting until she was ready to go home. I've got 8 different public school teachers in my family, or maybe 9, depends on how you count. 5 of those are or were high school football coaches, which also do count. I went to public school in West Texas near San Angelo. And then, of course, most important, both of my kids are in public school in Dallas ISD. My daughter is at Booker T. Washington, and my son is at D-Lee. So I'm very much personally invested in our schools and what they do for our kids. And I'm so thankful for the opportunity to come to be able to talk to you about this program, what Dallas ISD is working on now, and the fact that you're here willing to listen and participate shows your commitment to helping these kids succeed in their dreams. So thank you so much for that. So what are we here to talk about? If you'll go to the next slide. We're here to talk about the Dallas ISD bond that will be on your ballots on May 2nd. So here's a little preview page. And basically what we talk about is that by unanimous vote, get over here in front of the camera, by unanimous vote, the Dallas ISD School Board voted to send to the voters an opportunity to pass a bond. Now, unanimous vote is important because there aren't a lot of government bodies that do things by unanimous vote anymore, but every single part of the city, every trustee that represents every corner of the city believes this bond is what we need to be able to invest in our kids. The election is on May 2nd, and it is, early voting will start on April 20th, and the total number of the bond that we're asking for is $6.2 billion. Now, I said that in a room full of people very committed and passionate to public school, and still when I said that number that came out of the mouth, the first thing they said was, whew, oh my goodness. Well, yes, that number is a very large number, but bear with me and let me put that into context. And we're going to see when you actually break that down, you'll see that, yes, this is the largest bond in Texas history, but the last bond that was up in Houston was the largest bond in Texas history. And then the last bond that was in Dallas before that was the largest in Texas history. And every year when there's a bond in Houston or Dallas, it's always the largest in history because property values keep going up in the 2 biggest cities in the state. And when we break that down to what it looks like for your individual pocketbooks, it's actually a very small ask. But I'm going to get to that point. Before I do that, I want to talk about what's in the bond and what you're voting for, and then we'll talk about what the ask is. So let's put that into context. Dallas ISD is larger than most Texas cities. There are 132,000 students in Dallas ISD. There are 22,000 employees in Dallas ISD, including roughly 9,500 teachers. There are 240 different schools and facilities within the district. Now, what is 132,000? What does that mean? Dallas ISD is larger than the entire town of Richardson. Dallas ISD, if you add both the students and the teacher, is bigger than Waco. Chip and Joanna have nothing on Dallas ISD. It is an incredibly large group that we are servicing, and so when you deal with a large group like that, you have large numbers like what you see before you. Now, let's talk about where we are as a district, if we'll go to the next slide. Dallas ISD is a B-rated district in Texas. It is the highest rated urban school district in the state, higher than Houston, San Antonio, Austin, the #1 rated school district. Over the last year, if we go to the next slide, we made tremendous strides in the academic outcomes. And I say the last year, really over the last decade plus, we've made tremendous strides. But this last year in particular, we've had a big jump. What you see here is sort of how our ratings changed over the last 2 cycles. We doubled the amount of A-rated schools at Dallas ISD from 30 to 60. If you look at both the A and B-rated schools, 72% of every school in Dallas is either A-rated or B-rated by the state of Texas at this point in time. We have nearly eliminated our F-rated schools. We're only down to 2, and those will be gone this next cycle. There will be 0 F-rated schools in Dallas ISD next cycle. And that is continuing a long pattern of success. There has been a stigma around Dallas ISD that was well earned from basically not staying focused on student outcomes 15, 20 years ago. But we have, in the last 12 years, doubled the amount of students that are meeting expectations at grade level. And as a result, we are the highest rated district in the state. So how have we done that? Well, there's a lot of different components to it, but a part of it is the commitment that this community has made to Dallas Public Schools in the form of prior bonds. So if you'll go to the next slide, this is information we have on the 2020 bond that was passed. It was a $3.54 billion bond, again, at that time, the largest in the history of the state of Texas. It included over 200 renovations, over 15 campuses, new campuses in 2 years, including 10 entirely new facilities, and it generated over 63,000 jobs. And part of what I want to bring this up is we're talking about these academic outcomes. I believe they tie directly to the investments this community made in public schools. We're hosting this right now at the Marcus Park Recreation Center. And just across the playground out here is Marcus Elementary School. Marcus Elementary School was completely rebuilt with the dollars from the 2020 bond. And in the last year, which was their first full year in that space, they increased their academic score, their rating from the Texas Education Agency, 21 full points in 1 year. Is that entirely a brand new building? No, it involves a new principal and other investments that we've made in that school. But I do believe a big part of it is if you give students facilities that when they walk in the door, they can feel proud to be there, that show that we support them and want them to succeed, they then will rise to the occasion. They've done that there. They've done it at Walnut Hill Elementary International Leadership Academy, which is also in my district, in which Commissioner Morath at the Texas Education Agency came to talk about the scores across the entire state, and he chose that school to announce them because of the incredible growth that has happened at that brand new building. And we've seen that replicated over and over again. When you invest in these schools, these kids, these teachers thrive. So next I want to talk, if we'll go to the next slide, about the process that we used to create the bond. The bond process actually started, I believe, back in October 2024. There's a slide with a timeline a couple of clicks in. But it involved starting with the community. Each of the trustees appointed an executive committee member, which you'll see at the top. Mine was Jessica Whitson, who's 2 kids. One is a senior at W.T. White, and the other graduated from W.T. White, so invested in our local legacy schools. But we have community members from all across that serve as our executive committee, and then tens, if not over 100 different community members that volunteer to serve on various committees that we're working to try to put together. What does this bond need to look like? What does the community want when it comes to the bond? So we had finance subcommittees, we had technology, student experience, athletics, safety and security, and others. And I say all that to say, all of these discussions happened before it got to the elected officials like me. It wasn't put together by a group of us that are sort of, you hear stories in other districts of, well, if you give me this at this school, I'll give you that at that school. That's not how this was done. This was a data-driven, community-organized effort to identify what's best for our Dallas public schools. If you go to the next slide. Here you'll see lots of different photos of the work that they were doing. And if we go one more slide. And here's sort of our timeline with the over 65 meetings that the various committees did to work through to come up with the numbers. Now, when they actually did the results, if we go to the next slide, let me talk a little about what they were looking at. If you just Google Dallas ISD Bond 2026, you'll find a wealth of information on there. But one of the things you'll find is for every school in the entire city, there is a sheet like this. We had architects go out to every single facility and assess what needs to be done here. And they looked at 2 primary things. One is what we call a facilities condition index. Are the lights working? Does the HVAC work? Do the ceiling tiles, which there might be some in this room that might need a little bit of work, are those functional? Does it work? Does it operate? That's the facility condition, and that's the number that you'll see here. Then they also looked at the second number, which says ESA, Education Suitability Assessment. And what's that about? Well, you may be in a classroom in which the lights are working, the HVAC is working, but if you're having students that are trying to dance in a classroom that doesn't have a mirror, it's not suitable for what those particular students need. If you have a science lab that doesn't have sinks, it's not suitable for what particular students need. That's what educational suitability is. And then they also took the work with those various communities like committees like technology, which is looking at what are the network infrastructure things that we need to continue to stay relevant, or what types of laptops and other pieces of equipment do our students need? What do we need to do to update, basic safety issues, secure vestibules and others that we see being implemented at several of our schools? And they totaled that number up, and what they actually got to was a number of about $7.2 billion, which is a little bit more than what we felt comfortable asking the community for. Because if you look, when I get to the math portion, you'll see that that $6.2 billion is actually asking for a 1 penny increase per $100 of value. And we said, okay, look, we don't think it's right to go to the community and throw every single thing in the kitchen sink in there. Let's be discerning about what we think is really the top priorities, and that's what we'll feel comfortable going to the voters with. And that's what we've done here. And so to give you some examples of that, I'm going to talk about some things that aren't in the bond. There were some discussions about should we invest in teacher housing. I personally think it would be interesting to see how Dallas ISD and different public-private partnerships can potentially partner to do that, but I don't necessarily know if I want dollars to go to that, when maybe our contribution is something different, like unused property or something along those lines. But we didn't want to put that kinds of dollars in here because that's distracting from what our core mission is, which is to educate kids. I say that to say that this is a process in which we didn't say, here's our wish list, voters give all of it to us. But it was a discerning process to try to figure out what do we think is best for the community. So what made the cut? You'll go to the next slide. So the bond will actually show up as 4 different propositions on your ballot. You'll have to vote for Proposition A, B, C, and D. Now, if you're going to ask me why, all I can tell you is the legislature makes us do it that way. They make us take certain types of line items and separate them from others, and that's what we've done. And so I'm going to walk through what each of those 4 are. Let's talk about those. So first is Proposition A. And this is where the bulk of the renovation dollars would be. Out of the $6.2 billion, that's $5.9 billion. Now, that first starts with 26 replacement campuses. So if you go to the next slide, we have a list in here, and you can also find this on the bond website, of what different campuses are identified to be replaced. And the one in my district is Callier Elementary School, which is, I don't know the exact age, I know all 26. If you average them, the average age is more than 70 plus years old. But throughout the district, we've identified these 26 schools. And why these schools? It's a basic math problem. We add up the Facilities Condition Index and the Education Suitability Index, and if it costs more money to repair the school than to replace it, we replace it. So that's how you get on this list. But for the other campuses, if you'll go back one slide actually, where it says district renovations at all campuses, that's where we're looking at that FCI and ESA score. And we have identified what we think needs to be done at each one. Now, they always want me to tell you this. This is what the architects predict now. We'll see how construction costs go and other things, so we'll have to have some flexibility when we get into it, but that's what's driving our numbers, is the data-driven approach to figuring out what the schools need. Other items that are on here, we talked about science labs. This one's important. Every single portable in Dallas ISD will be removed through this bond at every single campus. And that's very, very important. It's important, one, because these are eyesores, and I want schools to be beautiful parts of our community, something that the community feels like is a part of their neighborhood rather than the eyesore that's stuck in the middle of it. But it's also very important for safety because, unfortunately, we've seen some of the tragic events that have happened throughout our state, and having students leave the secure building to go out to the portables is not as safe an option as having them all within the secure building is. So that's why that's there. And there are several others listed: safety, technology, transportation, playgrounds, and physical education. There are some athletic facilities and things like that. If you've been to Lowe's Stadium, which you should go to watch some of the WTY, the Thomas Jefferson football and soccer games and others, it needs some love. We're not trying to build $60 million superstructures like in Allen, Texas. We just want to have a place that, looks like students should be excited to play there. If you'll go now 2 slides forward. Now, one more slide. Now, here are the remaining 3 propositions. Proposition B, it says technology upgrades, including student, staff, and classroom devices. So you'll also notice there was technology listed in Prop A. That's just because certain types of technology are sort of infrastructure within buildings, and other types are physical devices like computers and those sorts of things. The legislature makes us separate those out, and so we do. Proposition C. Proposition C may sound confusing, but it should be the easiest sell that we have. Proposition C is simply refinancing some old debt to save money. There is some debt that is on the operating side of our books. So school districts operate with sort of the operating side. That's how we pay teachers and how we keep the lights on. And then we have a capital side of our books where we build facilities and upgrade schools. There is some debt on the operating side that qualifies to be on the capital side, that by moving it over there, we can save about $10 million in interest. And we also save operating dollars that we can use to spend on teachers and kids rather than spending them, rather than they're currently being spent. And so it's literally the equivalent of refinancing your home at a lower interest rate, and it just saves us money. But it's probably not the most intuitive one when you read the language on the ballot. So we're out here trying to explain and let people know that. And then finally, Proposition D. That's repairs and renovations to school district swimming pools. Now, this was actually on the 2020 ballot, and it did not pass. And what that means is that we didn't do a very good job explaining what these swimming pools are and why they matter. Now, I live next to WTY High School, very close to Jesuit High School, which is an awesome public and private school. And if you have the resources to send your kids there, and that's what you think is best for your family, you should absolutely do that. But we are not trying to be Jesuit High School. We're trying to be the best Dallas ISD we can. I'm not talking about that beautiful glass mausoleum that they have of a swimming pool over on Inwood. We're not trying to build anything that fancy. We're just trying to put plaster on pools that are 40 years old. We're trying to, there's one of our swimming pools where they had to remove the diving board because it's no longer considered safe, and it's still got the metal prongs that are sticking up out of it because we haven't had the capital dollars to solve that. And it's got little cones in front of it to make sure kids don't step on it. We're just trying to get them into shape so they're comparable to what we see at other school districts around us. And so that's our ultimate goal. And because we didn't do a good job of explaining that last cycle, I want to talk just a little bit more about what they do. If you'll go to the next slide. So I added this slide to the presentation. You guys are the first to see it. But this isn't just student athletes who like to swim. Dallas ISD, in many parts of our community, is the first exposure of young students to swimming safety in swimming pools. We take kids there and sort of get them some basic training on how to avoid getting hurt or injured in a pool. And as you know, drowning among young children is unfortunately much higher than it should be. And so we serve over 3,000 students a year, and a huge chunk of that is students that are just getting basic safety training, because in other communities, students don't have a lot of access to pools. And so by the time they first get there, they don't know how to be safe around them. And so we want to be able to create that. It also creates opportunities for students to go get their, why is my mind blanking? Who is it that takes care of people when you're at a swimming pool to make sure? Lifeguard. They get their lifeguard certifications. As my daughter would call that a certain type of moment, but I'll leave that alone. Get your lifeguard certification so that you can get a summer job. And of course, there are student athletes as well that use those. But that's our swimming pools. The main takeaway is, I know $25 million sounds like a lot of money. It's a very small fraction of the overall bond, and it has a very important purpose of helping keep our kids safe. So that's the good stuff. That's what we're going to do. Let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about here what the ask is. And this is where I told you at the beginning I was going to put that number into context. So $6.2 billion sounds like a lot of money. But again, it's because we have a lot of people and a lot of property in the city. If you actually break down what 1 penny increase means, it means for the average home in Dallas, which is roughly $525,000 in there, it's about $33 a year. That translates to about $2.79 a month. We're asking the average homeowner to sacrifice a cup of coffee a month. That's what we're doing. And with that cup of coffee, we get to invest in our kids the way that we have. So let me say that again. For the average home, it's roughly $33 a year, $2.79 a month. And I want to also add some additional kind of context to this. One, I forgot to say this last time, and I want to be sure to say it. If you're over the age of 65, you can ignore even that part because you're exempt from the property tax increase. So you don't have to even worry about the cup of coffee. We just are asking those under the age of 65 to think about whether investments in the schools and in your individual community is worth that, and we very much believe it is. So let's go to the next slide. So putting that in context, this is the comparison of the tax rates in the area from Dallas ISD relative to other schools. And what you see is that among the 10 largest districts in North Texas, Dallas ISD actually has the lowest tax rate of any other district. Frisco ISD is $1.17 per $100. Louisville ISD, $1.14. Mansfield, $1.11. Plano, $1.10. Mesquite, $1.10. And so on down the line. Dallas ISD is the only one whose tax rate is under $1 at 99 cents. And this is our projection for next year. You'll notice that it actually goes down. Now, I'm not trying to sell you that if you vote for a 1-cent tax increase that your taxes are going down as a result of that. They're not. But they are going down because of continued tax compression and expanding the homestead exemption, that your taxes will actually go down even if we do pass this bond. Yes, they'd be even a penny lower if we didn't pass it, but it's still the lowest in the area. Now, I said that at one of these meetings, and someone said, yeah, but my city of Dallas taxes, I hear you, I got to pay them too. I have no control over the city of Dallas taxes, so please direct those to someone else. I just want to say that we are doing our part to keep our taxes as low as they possibly can be. And with this increase, we will still have the lowest tax rate of all of the major districts in the area. To go to the next slide. And this is a slide that I pushed hard for, and I'm really proud to get this data because I think it really puts it into context. So what these are is a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bonds that have passed that had a rate increase in them since 2023, okay? And so you hear that $6.2 billion number that we're asking for, and you think, man, that's a huge number. And you see, when you actually apply it to the average home, it's only $33.48. Well, Richardson ISD, which passed their rate increase last year, their number is $1.4 billion, and their yearly impact is $124. Richardson asked for 4 times as much as what Dallas ISD is asking for. Let's see, I'm covering myself. Garland at $171. Corsicana, $806. That's getting so far above 33 cents, I can't do the math easily in my head. We are lower than all of these different requests in Corsicana, Cleburne, Sunnyvale, Callan, excuse me. And so the point of that is I know the top line number is large, and that headline risk is obviously something I'm trying to explain. But when we do explain it, and when you actually compare what we're trying to do here relative to others, you'll see that we're making a very modest ask for a very large payoff. So let's go to the next slide. So, sort of to wrap up, let me just walk again through the timeline. Early voting on this starts April 20th, which I believe is next week, next Monday, if I'm not mistaken, 1 week from today. So you can early vote on the 20th through the 28th, and then election day is on May 2nd. And then if you have any more questions about the bond, if there are things that I didn't get into, obviously we'll have some question and answer time here, but let me give you 2 resources to look at. If you'll go to the next slide. First, if you can scan this, but basically it's what I told you before. If you Google Dallas ISD Bond 2026, it'll take you straight to this page. This is where you can get specific info about schools and some of the different data that I've presented today. And then one more click if you could. Now, the way elections work, the Dallas ISD itself is not allowed to advocate for or against a bond. It can provide information, but it can't advocate. I, as a citizen and as a school board member, absolutely can, and that's why I'm out here today asking for your vote. But there's also an outside group called DallasVotesForKids.com that's trying to put information out for others to be able to learn more about the bond. There's who've made these signs. If you'd like a yard sign, I have a stash of them here. You can also go to their website and just say, I'd like a yard sign. It will magically show up on your yard the next day. You can sign up to get different information about events as people are going to talk about it. And then one additional ask, if there are others that would like to have discussions about this, I'm certainly happy to talk to whoever would like to do that. But we're also happy to give you resources for you to invite your friends over and talk a little bit about what's going to be in the bond. Sort of, I don't know what's watch party is the right term, but little parties where you get the bond parties, as we'll call them. We'll get together and you can learn more information about what's going on. So that's my presentation. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk to you about this. And I guess I'll end with, I believe these kids deserve the absolute best that this community can provide. And I think it's important for us as a community to build, if you want to have a great community with great jobs and great businesses, you need to have great schools. But more than anything, these kids deserve it. They deserve a place to walk in the door to make them proud. And when they have that opportunity, they have risen to the occasion. So I'm hoping we as a community will rise to their occasion and to be able to give them what they need to be able to live the lives that they want to lead. So thank you.
Lance, I say here.
Let me just take questions.
I say that we take some Q&A from the crowd. I'm going to check on the live stream, see if anybody, comments live, and I'll just kind of throw them at you. But yeah, let's open it up.
All right. Anybody have any questions I could answer? Let's see. My good friend Randy has come in. Good to see you, Randy. Anybody have questions?
Oh, and what about increasing taxes for those over 65?
Oh, good. Yeah. Now, there is some exception to that if you do major renovations, and I believe major renovations involves increasing square footage, like converting a garage, but for the vast majority of people, you are exempt from this type of tax increase if you're over the age of 65. Yes, ma'am.
There's some noise up there about the crop being technology. Like, is it good to give kids laptops and have too much screen time?
Well, so there's a balance to it. That's a great point. And there's been a lot of things we have learned, society has learned about if you give kids devices too early and too often, that it distracts from what they need to be able to develop. But while you can balance that, and you should, for example, my kids both went to Dealey Elementary School where there were very little access to technology. It's a Montessori school. And my experience in most of the elementary schools is there's a lot less exposure to technology than you might think, but it's something they're refining each year as they're trying to learn to do better. But at some point, they do have to actually learn how to use technology because it's a part of our lives. And so you've got to be able to balance it. And while I think we always can be asking ourselves, are we doing the right balance? If you're trying to tackle that problem, I don't think the solution is to vote this down and take them away entirely. That's like using a sledgehammer to try to solve a problem that just doesn't need that level of force. Instead, we need to be more careful and thoughtful about how we use them. But if we don't have the tools at all, then we've handicapped ourselves the ability to do what's right for kids when they do need access to them.
So, if a kid gets a laptop, do they take it home, or is it just left at school?
Well, it actually depends on the school, if you want to be real precise. So certain schools collect them, and some schools let you take them home, and there's a variety of different reasons why they do that, and I'm not sure I can answer all of those during these times. But like my kids do take their Chromebooks home. My son was working on his NJS essays last night, submitted them last night on his Chromebook that the district provided. But I do know there are some other schools where they don't always let them take them home. It just depends.
I have a live comment.
Yes.
For you, and if you could repeat the question into the mic so everybody knows. They would like to know how were you able to determine which facilities needed the repairs?
So the question is, how do we able to determine which facilities needed the repairs? And the answer to that is we engaged, first of all, the committee actually that helped organize the bond, which was the earlier slide, engaged experts, architects, to walk through every single campus or facility in the district and to basically score them. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but on two different metrics. One is what we call our facilities condition index, which is, are the lights working? Does the HVAC work? Just the basic functional skeleton bones of our facilities. And then the other is it suitable for the needs of a particular classroom, what we call our educational suitability score. And so the example I gave earlier was, having students trying to take dance in a classroom without a mirror, that's not suitable to what those particular students need, or science labs without sinks. Or some of it is just when you have a building that was built 70 plus years ago, it's not designed with the mobility and functionality that we now know are better ways to educate kids. And so, so it was outside third parties, architects primarily working with oversight from the community bond committee that identified what they thought were the needs at each individual school, and then they collected that together for the ultimate bond request.
There's a follow-up comment to your answer from the same person, which is, were all of the campuses considered?
Yes, every single campus was considered, and so you'll see some, if you start looking through these scores, where the scores are very low because Marcus is brand new, and there may be some maintenance items that need to happen because even 5 years into a school, there may be some little things that need to happen to make sure you're maintaining what you've invested in. But that's going to need a whole lot less resources than Callier, which is going to be completely replaced because that's a 70-plus-year-old school. I do want to talk about that. You know, a phrase I didn't use that I should is what we call the Facilities Condition Index. Another word for that is deferred maintenance. There's a lot of conversation right now about deferred maintenance and making sure we are being good stewards. That's what that's addressing. You have already, as a community, invested in these schools. You've already paid for them. We need to make sure we invest in them to honor your commitment and to make sure we're being good stewards of your money. Any other questions I can answer?
I have another live comment question.
Yes.
They would like to know if this bond is going to be used for teacher raises.
So the bond is not. The question is the bond going to be used for teacher raises? The answer to that is no, because it's not allowed to be. So there are, again, I mentioned there are two sides of our budget. There's a budget that is the operating budget, and there's a budget that's called interest and sinking. The interest is paying off interest on bonds. It's used for capital facilities and others. You are only allowed to spend money on teacher salaries and those things on the operating side of the budget. And if you paid attention to the last election cycle, there was a lot of effort to try to increase funding for public schools, and ultimately public schools did receive some money out of the last legislature to help that. But this doesn't, we are not allowed to be able to use funds for that purpose. But I do kind of want to talk about that because you give a politician a microphone and you get something he's really passionate about. I want to talk, this is a thing I get all the time and I think people don't understand. I get asked the question of, hey, my taxes keep going up every year. My property values keep going up every year, so I have to write a larger check every year. How come you as public schools still need money? I don't understand that. Well, that's because of how the operating side is funded. And if you're giving me a chance to explain it, I really want to do so. So our operating tax rate is actually the lowest that we can set it according to state law. We're not allowed to lower it any more than that without the state's approval. But the other thing that happens is the expense side, what we are allowed to spend per student, is also set by the legislature. They tell us exactly how much money we are allowed to spend. We can decide whether we want to put more on teachers versus more on this program here, but the cap of the total amount we're allowed to spend is set again by the legislature. So here's that question. If your costs are here, but the revenue generated for taxes keeps going up because your property values go up, where does that extra money go? Why is it that schools need any more money? Well, the answer to that is the more your property taxes contribute, the less the state feels that they need to be able to contribute to public education. And so the percentage of state contribution to public schools has gone down and down and down. And we just had a legislative session where they had a large surplus. And we went and said, please let us have some of that money to help us offset inflation because we haven't had any sort of dollars from public schools since 2019 before COVID happened. And they said, well, they give us a generous amount, $9 billion. That's about half of what inflation math said we needed. But what are we effectively doing there? We're saying, hey, you've kept the property taxes. Can we just please have some back so we can educate our kids? And it's very frustrating that's kind of the cycle of where it works, because I think public schools end up getting a bad rap for not, being able to address all the needs when we really don't have any control over our ability to meet all the needs that we have. And so I thank you for that question, because it allows me to talk about something I'm very passionate about is, people need to understand how schools are funded so that they know who to talk to whenever they want to see more invested in their public schools.
So for clarification on that point.
Yes, sir.
The state doesn't take our property taxes from the school district, right?
Well,
they'll stay here, but they reduce what you're going to get from the state.
It's a little combination of both. School finance is a bit of a complicated concept. So there's, if you've heard of Robin Hood, if you remember that concept that goes along. So if you just add up, and I'm going to oversimplify this, which means I very well may make a mistake. So thankfully we're recording it for all time so people will know this. But if you add up the total number of students and you add up by the number of dollars you're allowed to spend per student, you'll get a total amount of money that is supposed to be spent on public education. Dallas ISD actually exceeds that in its property revenues for its particular students. So we have to write a check back to the state as part of what was usually called the Robin Hood kind of situation to help redistribute some of those funds. But the net effect of that is some of it's redistributed, but some of it also just reduces the amount the state has to invest. The state is still investing, but it's just not investing what it had to 20 years ago, 30 years ago. The percentages have continued to go down. Yeah. Yes, sir. Well, it is the amount that is collected on your tax bill, but not every amount of that stays in Dallas ISD. Yeah, it gets either a big chunk of it gets redistributed to others or to help lower what the state ultimately contributes.
Is any portion of the 6.2 billion going back to the state?
No, none of that will. And that's, I guess, the punchline of what I wanted to talk about, which is because the state tells us what we're allowed to collect and it tells us what we're allowed to spend, you know, there's actually very few levers you as a community have for you to say, I want to vote for contributing additional to public schools. This is one of the ways you get to do that. You get to vote for a bond that then invest in your community and in your public schools. And so this is one of those levers that you have outside the system to be able to say, we believe in these students and we want to see them have all the tools and resources that they need.
I have another live comment question.
Yes.
Question is teacher training also included in the facility upgrades? They gave an example. For example, our school has a new theater, dance room with a bar and a mirror, ballet, and even a kiln for making pottery. However, we don't have any faculty who have time or training to use these amenities, so students don't get to take advantage of them.
Well, that's a great question. So the question is teacher training on the use of some of the new facilities included in the bond dollars? The answer to that is no, because we are not allowed to use bond dollars on people. But if we see situations like that, where we have a new facility like a kiln that's not being used, that is certainly something we need to look at and understand why. You know, Dallas ISD has the highest teacher retention rate among all the districts in the area. It also pays more to teachers among all the districts in the area. But that doesn't mean when you have 9,500 teachers and 240 schools that things don't fall through the cracks. And so I very much appreciate that. And if that commentator will tell me what school that is, and you can either email me at, you know, Lance Currie at Dallas ISD, or on my campaign website, or you can Google me and find me on my work website. I'm happy to look into that and see what the answer is on that. Great.
Lance, you kept talking about the state takes all our money, so it comes down to we have to talk to our legislators to get monies for the schools, and it hasn't been successful. They just keep taking away. One of the things is I was against vouchers, and I remember writing a letter to Africa. Oh, you want a voucher? If you think it's worth $10,000 for private schools, why isn't it worth $10,000? Just every student gets $10,000 to do whatever they want. In the state of Rhode Island, you have a pocket of money and you can do with it what you want. So they don't do that here. It doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, you know, I mean, a couple things I want to comment on that. One, that this is a nonpartisan seat, and so I do certainly have my own personal views, but I very much try to honor that because I think all of us, regardless of your political party, want to have kids succeed. And that's one of the beautiful things about this role is that I talk to people on all sides of the different aisles or different points. And when you get them to talk about what they really care about, they want students to be able to have the resources they need to learn, to live the lives that they want to live. I was, as part of that, opposed to the voucher program. I'm not telling you what party I am. You can look that up and figure it out if you want. But I was opposed to the voucher program mostly because of my role is to try to steward resources for public schools, and I don't want to distract from those. Now, I'll say all that to say, to be fair, you know, it's not that vouchers are getting more than public schools are. The math is a little complicated there. So the per student number is $6,163, I believe. I forget the number exactly right. But there are increases for if a student is English as a second language or other different characteristics. And if you add those up, I'm not saying they're apples to apples, but they're not as far apart as some of the discussion is. And I feel like I've got to be fair if we're going to talk about that.
$6,000 isn't very much money, and that's a number that's been around for eons. I was on the board for a special needs facility, agency, and that was like 15 years ago, and that was the going rate, and that was presented.
Well, it has gone up some. It hasn't gone up much. You know, I think that number I gave you was the number prior to the last session. I do think it's gone up. I can't remember the exact amount. It has gone up a little, but it's still below 6,500. I forget the exact number.
Yeah. If it's in the Constitution, Article 7, that every child is entitled to a free public education, why aren't they giving money to the school when we have a surplus? And that, to me, is a legislative thing, and you guys are doing the best you can in the DISD or any ISD.
I hear you, and you're right. The legislature is, if you want to have conversations about whether we need to be investing more in the operating side of public education, that is a conversation with the legislature, and we certainly go down, you know, in my individual capacity and others, and try to build relationships and explain to them why I think that's important. But this is democracy. That's what it is. It's you reaching out to your folks and the people that represent you, that you employ as voters, and letting them know that you care deeply about public education and you want to see them prioritize it. And I do want to say, I am very appreciative of the fact that we did get some increase during the last legislative session. But, you know, just like it is when we talk about student outcomes, we've made a lot of progress. We still have a lot of more work to do. I'm appreciative of the progress we made on school funding last session. We still have a lot more work to do. And so I will certainly continue to be talking to legislatures that will take my phone call about how I want us to see us continue to invest in public education.
I think it's great to see the improvements done in DISD, the budget you've got, and, you know, it's amazing. And I'm also very proud to say that in my precinct, I noticed in the last week, there were a whole bunch of these signs all over the place. So those will be next to my vote now signs if you live in my precinct.
And again, if you'd like a sign, I've got one in front of my yard. If you'd like a sign, please, if you're here in the room, take them with you as you go. And if you want to grab a sign, just go to this website. If you go to the next slide, DallasVotesForKids.com, they can have one delivered to you. But any other questions I can answer for anyone? Anything else on the live stream?
I have another live comment. And by the way, I mean, we've got the room till 7:30, so you know, we don't have to rush out of here. But I have another live comment. The bond is going towards a lot of construction projects that can't be started all at once. Will the materials and labor costs that rise impact the cost of the bond?
So it won't impact the cost of the bond in terms of what the ask is for the voters. The ask for the voter is $1, right? And we predict as we are trying to plan out. You're absolutely right. One thing we don't do, I want to make sure this is clear. We don't, the moment this passes on May 2nd, on May 3rd, go to the bank and borrow $6.2 billion. That's not how this works. Instead, bond projects are planned out over time, over a sequence. That's why you'll still see some of the 2020 bond that is still being rolled out. And we borrow the money as those projects roll out. We don't borrow until we need it. Does that make sense? And so we do that by issuing bonds, which people can buy. It's essentially our school district saying, if you buy a bond and let us have these dollars now, we'll pay you back with interest, just similar to a loan. So it will roll out as the projects roll out. And this is planned to roll out over, I think I've heard is over a 10-year period of time. It may come sooner or later than that. Now, if construction costs rise faster than what we predict, then the dollars we have will be the dollars we have. It just means we'll have to figure out a way to stretch them to try to accomplish as much as we can or scale back what we are planning to do to meet the need. I had a question about property values. What if our property values don't go up as much as you are predicting? We're actually fairly conservative and have been, and think that's unlikely. But if it does, and if you do the math of property rate times property value, and it doesn't add up to 6.2, but it adds up to 5.8, we'll just spend 5.8. This isn't a scenario where, in my early 20s, where maybe I had a little too much fun on my credit card. You're only allowed to borrow what the market will sell you, and if the market won't sell you more than 5.8, that's all you borrow. So you can't get out over your skis in the same way as you can in other contexts.
I've got another live question. is what about the charter schools? But I think they need is any of the money from the bond going to charter schools.
So, no, the answer to that is no. This is a bond specific for Dallas. So the question is, does any of the money, I realize I got to repeat the question. The question is, any of the money going to go to charter schools? No. This bond dollars are for the Dallas ISD public school system, and so the bond dollars will go toward our facilities. And so there won't be anything spent toward that. There's a lot of conversation about the new voucher program. None of this will tie to any of those dollars. This is entirely separate. Yes, ma'am. Sure.
When they apparently were reading up on the bond, they said a lot of fuzzy math they're using to say this only increases property taxes by $34. This is $45,000 per DISD student. That was the comment. And I will add to this. I said, in response, sounds like you should have to be informational session to learn more about it. And it turns out this family has moved to another county for reasons such as this. That's why I said this sounds more like you're right. But my question would be, how would you respond to something like that? That's not even a question.
Sure. But I think it's a fair point that needs to be explained. So the question is, if you do the math, doesn't this look like about $45,000 per student in Dallas ISD? Well, I haven't done the math, but I think what they're doing is taking $6.2 billion and divided it by 132,000. I don't know if that's exactly 45,000. But for the sake of discussion, I'll bring that up. But remember, these don't all get built, used in 1 year, and then torn down the next year. So it's not 132,000 students. It's 132,000 students times the life of these buildings, which is on average 33 years. Well, our current average age of our buildings is 42 years. It will drop to 33 years after this is done. So fairer math would be, let's multiply 132,000 times 33, and then divide 6.2 billion by that. I don't know what that number is, but it's a lot smaller than 45,000. So it is I get the point they're trying to make, but understand that this is an investment in class after class after class of student, hopefully 40 years of classes of students to be able to go to school and facilities that they can learn in. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I've been talking to people about those of us who grew up in the north, went to schools that are 100 years, that now are 100 years old and they're still standing and they're still losing, and people go to them and they're safe and blah, blah, blah. How come Dallas can't do anything beyond, they just tear it down?
Well, they're only going to do that to 26 schools. It's about 70 years, so they're almost getting to your northern standard. But it's simply the math. What we're seeing is that it's more cost effective to invest in modernizing with a new building for only 26 out of our 240 than it is to just pour money into it over and over again. And so it's a math problem on what's the best use of taxpayer dollars to preserve schools. And I am not an architect and an engineer, and I haven't gone to a Holiday Inn, and I don't pretend to be one on TV. And so I have to listen to those experts when they come and talk to us about what the needs of our schools are.
I have another live question. Several parents have expressed disappointment with the use of personal tech devices in the classroom. If Prop B is not approved, will Dallas ISD reconsider use of these devices in the classrooms? Will they continue to use them that are just old and underfunded?
So the question is, and this is similar to a question Ms. Melanie asked me earlier, there is some skepticism that we are seeing about the use of personal electronic devices in classroom. And research is starting to show us that if you just put the devices in front of kids, it's not the best and most effective way to educate them. That's one of the reasons why, and I will certainly give the legislature credit for this, much to the chagrin of my 16-year-old daughter, we banned, the legislature, not me, banned cell phones in all classrooms in Texas. My daughter was very upset about that. I thought it was wonderful. And I got to tell her, not only you can't have your cell phone in class, but I didn't do it, so you don't get to blame me for it. So it is good that we are making those types of adjustments. And I do think we need to be sure we are balanced in what the research tells us is the most effective way to use technology. And there is a balance. I don't believe technology should be all the students ever look at. My students went to a Montessori school, Dealey Elementary School, where they didn't do that. And it's my understanding that most of the schools have primarily hands-on type components. But I also don't think the answer is all technology is bad. There's some really interesting things that you can do with technology. So for example, if you have students in Dallas ISD, they may have come home and talked about iReady. iReady is a learning software in which you interact with it. It's kind of like Khan Academy. You can sit there and work with math or with English and others, and it will let you answer some questions, and then it will choose which questions to show you next based on where you are in your level, so that you're always getting presented technology and information that matches kind of what you need to have. Should that be all day? A student sits in front of the computer doing that software? Absolutely not. But is it a tool that might be useful in the overall picture of how we educate kids? I think so. And the question is, are you going to give educators, again, I'm not an educator any more than I'm an architect. I'm a lawyer in my day trade, but are you going to give educators the tools so that they can make the right decisions about the best way to educate our kids? If you were to vote down Prop D, what you're basically saying is, we don't trust you educators to make that decision. We're going to try to pull to make that decision for you. And I trust teachers to be able to know what is best for their kids, as opposed to me standing outside the classroom trying to dictate to them. Yes, ma'am.
Do teachers, are they actually going to have that decision-making capability, though? Because right now, it sounds like the amount of time kids spend on iReady, which I have a big beef with, we can talk about it.
Absolutely, let's please do.
But as of now, from talking to our principal, it seems like the guidelines are rolled out from the district at the top, and that's what they follow. Our teachers, I do not think, have the flexibility and decision-making capability when it comes to this technology. It seems that it's made from the top down.
So we definitely should talk about that afterward, and I want to understand that more. So as I understand how our curriculum rolls out to our various different schools, we do have uniform curriculum where it's usually Amplify or Eureka or some others, which dictates, as I understand it, what teachers need to teach. It doesn't necessarily, though, dictate exactly how they need to teach, or at least that's the vision when I talk to the superintendent about how it's supposed to work, so that teachers still have the creativity to find, how do I connect this material? We did that on purpose, because prior to having a uniform set of curriculum, when individual schools could sort of sign up for whatever sort of hodgepodge, we saw a wide range of quality. Sometimes it was very high quality curriculum, sometimes it's very much not high quality curriculum. And so we needed to standardize that. Part of one of those things that did was use curriculum that asks more of students, because we believe students can do more. And by having high quality material, students have risen to that occasion, and we think they are starting to thrive. I have also, because I talk to teachers too, hear anecdotes where that does not go its way that it always should. Where I hear stories of, I had someone come into the classroom and say, you didn't say it this way, you needed to say it that way. And I go back to the administration and say, hey, this is what I'm hearing. And it's a constant balance when you have a district this large trying to get it right. But the vision is the curriculums that we have, teachers should have a framework that makes sure that we are giving students appropriate rigor in what they're facing, but they should have some flexibility in being able to do that. As for particular, your comment about iReady and technology, we should talk more about that, because I do think the district is constantly trying to learn how to do that right. And I'm not going to say that they've always done it right, because I've seen it with my own kids in schools not have the experience that I would like them to have all the time. But what I do say is that I have a deep belief that the people that run the district that I get to interact with care deeply about trying to do it right, about trying to figure out how we educate kids in a way that helps them succeed. I'm seeing in the results improvement, which is what I as an outside observer can look at. But I will also say we still have a long way to go. Because while we may have doubled the number of kids meeting our expectations at grade level, it's still not near where it needs to be. And so we need to continue to find a way to innovate. And we are thinking about that. By the way, you may have seen recent articles of, we are now expanding pre-K3 and pre-K4 free for everyone who wants to do that. If you did not know that, pre-K3 and pre-K4 is going to be free for everyone in the city if you want to do that. Because we know investing in early education leads to kids being better ready for kindergarten and first and continuing to grow. We're also doing some pilot programs at a few schools relating to, they call it pre-primer, but primer is something that is at some of the different private schools in the area. I don't know if that's going to work or not. What I like about that is more the commitment to trying to innovate, because it says something about who we are as a culture, that we're not willing, as a school district culture, we're not willing to just say, hey, we've arrived and stop. But we're going to continue to push. And we have not yet figured out the magic sauce to make every student get 100 on every test. We just got to keep digging to see what's the next innovation, what's the next thing we can do to keep pushing kids in our classrooms further. So.
I say we take one more question from inside the room, if anybody has anything left. No? Okay, good.
All right.
Vince, do you want to have one final push?
Well, I just thank you again so much for the opportunity to come and to talk. Thank you for the excellent questions. You have me up on my feet and answer a little bit. And that's the thing I love about this job, is that I get to learn what you guys care deeply about. And these opportunities to come and speak to you are really critical to making sure that I understand and we understand what you want to see from your schools. And then the last pitch I'll make is the pitch I made before. I believe deeply in the process that has led to this. I believe that the outcomes that we have already created for kids have been wonderful, and they are built in large part because the city has invested in our community. And I want to see us continue that investment because these kids and these teachers deserve it. So please go vote. You can start early voting on Monday, and then the election day is on May 2nd. So please go vote. And if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me. My campaign address is lance@lancecurrie.com. My district address is lancecurrie@dallasisd.org. Feel free to email me. I'm happy to answer whatever questions I can. So thank you so much.